The Longhouse lay silent under the cold northern sky, its walls heavy with the scent of smoke and timber, yet it was never truly asleep. The hearth glowed faintly, a heartbeat of warmth in the vast darkness, casting flickering shadows on rough-hewn beams. Outside, the snow drifted silently, muffling the wind, but inside, life pulsed quietly through the wood and stone, through the breaths and dreams of the people who called this place home. The warriors had returned from the day's labors, some from the forest with axes slick with sap and ice, some from the forge with sparks still clinging to their beards. They settled beside the fire, rubbing sore muscles, their bodies heavy with fatigue, yet their eyes carried the restless vigilance of men who had seen the wilderness in all its cruelty. Some whispered softly, telling tales of wolves glimpsed through the snow, of distant fjords glinting in the afternoon sun, of the river that ran dark and cold through the valley. Others sat in silence, listening to the crackle of the fire, letting it speak to them in a language older than words. Children huddled on straw pallets at the far end of the hall, their small forms wrapped in furs. They were both asleep and awake, half dreaming of adventures that stretched beyond the mountains, beyond the forests, beyond the knowledge of even their elders. In the flickering light, their imaginations turned simple toys into swords, sticks into dragons, and shadows into spirits who whispered secrets of distant lands. Sometimes they murmured names in their sleep, names of gods, heroes, or unseen beings, and the adults, listening, wondered if the old stories had taken root in the unseen corners of the children's minds. Women moved silently among the hearths, checking embers, drawing water, feeding the smaller animals that wandered inside. Their movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, a dance that had been performed for generations. In some corners, the women whispered old songs, songs meant to soothe, to guard against spirits, to call blessings from gods unseen. Occasionally, one would pause, glancing toward the Longhouse doors, listening for a sound that might herald a visitor, a messenger, or a threat carried by the night. Outside, the northern wind whispered through the pines. It brought with it the scent of frost and distant seas, of animals stirring in the darkness, of the unseen world beyond the village. The Longhouse seemed a fragile sanctuary against the vast wilderness, yet it was alive with stories, secrets, and dreams that connected the family within to the world beyond. No one could fully sleep here without acknowledging the presence of the night, the spirits, the gods, the unseen watchers who roamed both forest and hearth. The warriors, eventually, would lay down on their pallets, their eyes heavy, yet never fully closing. Dreams came swiftly to some, bringing visions of battles won and lost, of distant lands and of home, of ancestors whose voices echoed in the firelight. To others, sleep was a thin veil, pierced by memories, fears, and hopes, so that they rested with one hand on a weapon, prepared for the sudden intrusion of danger. For Vikings knew that the night was not only a time for rest but also for vigilance. In the dimmest corners, shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. Sometimes it was the wind shifting the smoke, sometimes the flicker of torchlight across a wall, but sometimes it felt as if the Longhouse itself breathed, as if it remembered every laugh, every sorrow, every whispered prayer that had ever passed through it. The past and present interwove seamlessly, and those attuned to the quiet could sense the layering of centuries. Ancestors sleeping alongside the living, sharing the warmth of the fire, sharing the long vigil of the night. Time in the Longhouse was different from the outside world. The hours flowed not by the sun but by the fire, by the rhythm of breath, by the quiet motions of a community attuned to both survival and memory. The night was long yet intimate. It held both fear and comfort, both silence and stories. And when the northern lights began to shimmer faintly across the sky, the Longhouse seemed to acknowledge them, the flickering shadows bending toward the celestial dance, as if the firelight itself had heard the tales of the heavens. Even the animals, dogs, cats, and sometimes small livestock, carried their own presence through the night. Their movements were subtle, a patter of paws, a whisper of breath, a warmth in the darkness that reminded the humans within that life continued, even when the wind outside threatened to erase the boundaries between the seen and unseen worlds. The Longhouse was a living organism, and every heartbeat, every sigh, every flicker of light was part of its pulse. Outside, the snow glimmered faintly under the stars. Wolves howled in the distance, their voices haunting yet melodic, carrying across valleys and frozen rivers. Some heard in these calls omens, others heard warnings, and some simply listened with awe, feeling the wilderness press against the fragile walls of civilization. And all the while, the family within the Longhouse slept, not fully, never fully, but enough to continue, enough to survive, enough to dream. The night deepened, folding the Longhouse into a world apart from the frozen landscape beyond. Shadows stretched and twisted along timber walls, sometimes stirred by the flickering of the hearth, sometimes seeming to move with intent of their own. The air carried the warmth of the fire but also the chill from the northern wind that pressed insistently against the walls. Every breath inside the hall mingled with the smoke and the scent of wool, wood, and earth, forming a cocoon of life against the vast solitude outside. Elders sat in quiet corners, leaning on carved wooden posts, their hands resting on walking sticks worn smooth by decades of travel and labor. They spoke softly to one another, telling stories not for amusement but for preservation, stories of ancestors, of raids across icy seas, of God's interventions in human affairs. Every word, every pause was weighted with memory, as if the night itself held the audience in rapt attention. Some listeners drifted into slumber mid-story, their dreams echoing the tales being told, weaving them into visions as vivid as the living firelight. The young warriors, meanwhile, were restless. Sleep came in patches, and often they stirred to remember what the day had demanded. In their dreams, axes swung, ships pitched against stormy waves, shields clanged, and cries of victory and loss mingled indistinguishably. The line between past battles, imagined raids, and the whispered lessons of elders blurred. The firelight reflected in their eyes, casting long, flickering shadows that merged with the spirits of the ancestors, who were said to wander the Longhouse at night, watching over the living. In one far corner, a mother wrapped her youngest in furs, humming a quiet song meant to bridge the worlds of awake and asleep. The melody was older than the village itself, carried down through generations, a lullaby that spoke not only to comfort but to protection. As the child's breathing deepened, the mother allowed herself to drift toward the fire, feeling the weight of responsibility, of survival, of unseen eyes that might be watching. The night was never passive. It demanded attention, respect, and subtle rituals, or misfortune would find its way through cracks in the walls or into the hearts of those careless enough to ignore it. The hearth flickered, sending sparks upward into the smoke-laden rafters. Each spark seemed like a fleeting spirit, rising and vanishing, perhaps carrying prayers to gods unseen, Odin, Freya, or lesser spirits who guarded hearths and households. Some whispered that the sparks were messengers, bridging the mortal and divine. Others believed they were memories of the fallen, ancestors who walked alongside the living in fleeting forms of light. No one fully understood, and yet all acknowledged their presence with a nod, a whispered word, or a quiet offering of bread or ale. Outside, the wilderness pressed close. Wolves moved silently through the snow, their eyes reflecting the starlight like molten silver. The wind carried distant sounds of ice breaking over frozen streams, the moaning of tall pines, the faint cry of a raven circling above. Every sound was measured, every movement considered. Even those asleep felt its presence in the unconscious rhythm of their hearts. The Longhouse was a fragile barrier between civilization and wildness, between the known and the unknown, yet it was alive with both. Dogs curled near the fire, occasionally lifting their heads to sniff the air, sensing the night beyond human perception. Cats prowled silently, weaving between pallets and stools, guardians of shadows as much as companions. Even the livestock, though restless at times, contributed to the living tapestry of the Longhouse, each breath and movement a part of the symphony of life. And within all of this, the Longhouse itself seemed aware. Its walls absorbed stories, its beams remembered every step and whisper. The floorboards creaked in familiar patterns, responding to the weight of bodies that had walked them for decades. The very air held memories, of joy, of sorrow, of fear, of triumph. To live within its walls was to be part of a continuum that stretched beyond any single human lifetime. Time in the Longhouse was elastic, stretching and compressing with the pulse of the fire and the wind, the breathing of humans and animals alike. Night was not a void but a living, breathing entity. Dreams were as real as waking life, shadows as meaningful as light. And in the deepest hours, when even the elders had dozed, when the young warriors barely stirred, when the wind outside threatened to steal the warmth from the hall, the Longhouse held them, a sanctuary, a witness, a silent guardian through the vast, frozen night. The night deepened further, and with it, the Longhouse seemed to breathe more fully, as if the timber and stone themselves were alive, carrying centuries of memories in every creak and shadow. The fire's glow softened, illuminating faces heavy with sleep, while the flicker of sparks seemed to dance in rhythm with the heartbeat of the dwelling. Outside, the northern wind pressed against the walls, bringing the scent of snow, pine, and distant seas, reminding all within that life beyond the Longhouse was as unpredictable as it was eternal. In the farthest corner, a young warrior shifted restlessly. His body lay on the straw pallet, but his mind had already departed the warm enclosure. In dreams, he sailed across icy fjords, the longship cutting through waves that roared like beasts. Oars struck water in perfect rhythm, and he could hear the shouts of comrades, the clash of swords, and the cries of distant enemies. Though asleep, he moved with the motion of the vessel, his instincts guiding him even in the imagined chaos. The elders whispered that the dreams of warriors were not mere imagination. They were messages, omens, fragments of fate sent by the gods to prepare them for battles yet to come. Nearby, a mother hummed an ancient melody, lulling her youngest to deeper sleep. The song, older than any living memory, was said to bridge the waking world and the unseen. Each note carried protection, a gentle weaving of divine blessing into the very air. The child murmured names in slumber, Odin, Thor, Freya, and some of the adults, listening, paused in awe. Even if one did not believe in the gods themselves, one could not deny the power of the night, the subtle guidance that whispered in dreams, in shadows, in sparks from the hearth. The elders, resting against carved posts, had their own dreams, less frantic than those of the young warriors, but no less vivid. They saw visions of the ancestors, figures carved in memory and spirit, moving through great halls and ancient forests. Faces of long-dead relatives, warriors who had sailed before them, women who had guided households, floated through their slumber. Sometimes these dreams were warnings, sometimes wisdom. Often they were both. Upon awakening, the elders would interpret these visions carefully, passing subtle lessons to those still awake, shaping decisions, behaviors, and understanding within the Longhouse. Some warriors and villagers did not sleep at all but engaged in quiet night rituals. One man traced runes onto a wooden tablet, whispering protective words over the lines, believing that careful preparation in the dark hours could ward off misfortune. A woman moved silently to the hearth, casting salt and herbs into the fire as offerings to the spirits who guarded the home. Every motion, though barely perceptible, was a prayer, a dialogue with forces beyond comprehension, a recognition that night held power as well as rest. Outside, the northern wilderness was alive. Wolves howled in the distance, a chorus that carried across valleys and frozen rivers. Some heard omens in the haunting sound, warnings of danger or opportunities for courage. The wind moved through the trees, sometimes sounding like whispers, sometimes like laughter. Occasionally, a lone raven's cry would pierce the night, signaling the presence of omens or the approach of news yet to arrive. To the villagers, these sounds were not frightening. They were part of the balance between the seen and unseen, a constant reminder that the Longhouse existed in both worlds. Animals within the hall contributed their own presence. Dogs shifted in the straw, their ears twitching towards sounds humans could not perceive. Cats prowled silently, their eyes glinting with awareness of both light and shadow. Even chickens and goats, though smaller and less perceptive, carried warmth and life into the night, grounding the humans in the reality of the dwelling while allowing their minds to drift into dreams, visions, and whispered conversations with ancestors and gods. Time within the Longhouse became fluid. Hours passed not according to the sun, which slept beneath the horizon, but by the rhythm of breath, heartbeat, and fire. Night was measured in sparks and shadows, in murmurs and whispers, in the subtle shifts of body and spirit. Dreams wove together with reality, past intermingled with present, and the Longhouse itself seemed to pulse with memory. Every creak of a beam, every flutter of smoke, every quiet movement carried the accumulated weight of generations. By the mid-watch of night, the Longhouse was a tapestry of life and dream. Warriors sailed imaginary seas, mothers sang protective songs, elders conversed with ancestors, and rituals of protection and foresight continued quietly in shadows. Even the fire seemed aware, crackling with a consciousness that mirrored the heartbeat of the dwelling. Each ember that rose toward the rafters carried away a fragment of hope, fear, memory, or prayer, disappearing into the darkness only to return in dreams, visions, and the subtle guidance of night. As the first hint of northern dawn approached, the Longhouse remained alive. Though eyes grew heavy, though breaths deepened, though limbs relaxed, no one truly slept alone. Every individual, every animal, every beam of timber and curling smoke was part of a greater consciousness, part of a shared journey through night into day. The Longhouse itself held the collective memory of every night, every dream, every whisper that had passed through it. And when the sun finally touched the snow-covered landscape outside, the villagers would awaken carrying traces of night, insights, warnings, courage, and the quiet magic of a world half hidden from the waking eye. The night stretched long over the frozen north, and within the Longhouse, every corner held a story, a secret, a whisper carried from the past. The children slept in bundles of furs, yet their dreams were not always gentle. Some dreamed of faraway lands they had never seen, of icy seas and towering mountains, of dragons and great beasts prowling the wilderness. Their tiny hands gripped imaginary swords, shields, or staffs, and in the flickering firelight, their bodies moved subtly, reacting to battles only they could perceive. One child murmured a name in their sleep, a name belonging neither to the living nor to any known ancestor. Elders who had been awake noticed this and whispered quietly, recognizing the echo of divine attention, for sometimes the gods chose the young to carry visions. The mother of the child, sensing the weight of unseen eyes, tucked the blanket closer and hummed a protective song. Her voice, soft and rhythmic, seemed to create a bubble of safety, a barrier against the unpredictable world outside and the spirits that wandered in the spaces between reality and dream. At the far end of the hall, the warriors spoke in hushed tones, careful not to wake the sleepers but unable to resist sharing their thoughts. They whispered of distant fjords, of raids imagined in the mind's eye, of encounters with rival clans, and of the spirits said to linger at the edges of forests and rivers. Sometimes they spoke of dreams, visions sent by the gods, warnings, guidance, or cryptic lessons, and they listened as others interpreted the omens. The firelight carved their faces into shifting reliefs, half real, half imagined, blurring the line between what was and what might be. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the subtle cries of wolves and the soft rustle of trees. Some listened, claiming to hear messages in the patterns, advice from the gods, or warnings of approaching danger. In the stillness, every sound took on significance. A raven's cry, the snap of ice under unseen paws, the distant howl of a predator, all were read as signs, each interpreted according to knowledge handed down by generations of ancestors who had walked these lands before. The elders moved silently among the hall, checking the small embers of the hearth, adjusting furs, and casting protective gestures in the air. Their hands traced invisible symbols over the fire and the sleepers, a dance of guidance and watchfulness. They murmured names of gods and ancestors, inviting protection, seeking favor, acknowledging the presence of forces that could neither be seen nor fully understood. To them, the night was alive, a living entity that carried both blessing and threat. Animals contributed to the tapestry of night. Dogs curled against the sleepers, alert to subtle sounds, while cats prowled the shadows, weaving between pallets and stools. Even the goats and chickens huddled quietly, their breath visible in the cold air, a reminder that life continued even in stillness. The Longhouse, filled with human and animal presence, became a living organism, every sound, movement, and breath a part of its rhythm, a subtle symphony of life that connected all inhabitants. As hours passed, dreams intertwined with reality. A young warrior envisioned the longship gliding over black water under the northern lights, the stars reflecting off the waves as if guiding the vessel. The elder near the hearth recalled the ancestors' stories, seeing them replayed in visions of firelight and shadow. The mother hummed her lullaby, feeling the presence of unseen guardians walking silently along the walls. Even the animals seemed attuned, sensing shifts in energy, responding to patterns invisible to human eyes. And always, the Longhouse itself seemed conscious. The timber beams and stone floors remembered every footstep, every whispered prayer, every dream. Shadows moved not only from firelight but from memory and spirit, creating a dynamic, living environment that existed beyond ordinary perception. Time became fluid. Moments of stillness were as charged with meaning as moments of sound and movement. Every resident, awake or asleep, was part of this continuum, their lives entwined with those of ancestors, gods, and creatures that dwelled in both seen and unseen realms. By the final hours before dawn, the Longhouse had absorbed the essence of the night: dreams, whispers, songs, omens, and secrets. The children, restless yet safe, carried fragments of visions they would later recount as stories. The warriors rested, bodies weary but minds alive with guidance from gods and ancestors. The elders held the continuity of wisdom, interpreting omens and shaping understanding. And the house itself pulsed with life, a testament to generations who had lived, slept, and dreamed within its walls. As the first pale light of dawn crept across the northern landscape, the Longhouse remained vigilant, holding the night in memory even as the world outside stirred awake. It was a place where sleep was never passive, where dreams were intertwined with fate, and where life, death, and divinity coexisted in the quiet glow of embers and the breath of sleepers. And in that quiet, the people of the Longhouse knew that the night had passed, but its lessons, visions, and secrets would guide them through the day ahead. The Longhouse had settled into a rhythm that belonged not to the world outside but to its own pulse. The wind moaned across the snow, but inside, the air was alive with whispered knowledge and subtle movements. Elders sat near the hearth, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow, eyes reflecting memories centuries deep. They spoke softly, their words carrying through the hall like gentle eddies, shaping the night and influencing dreams even without waking those who listened. These were the keepers of lore, the guardians of omens, the ones who understood that the night was not mere absence of light but a living, breathing space where the threads of fate could be glimpsed. One elder traced runes upon a flat stone, murmuring incantations learned from his own forebears. Each symbol carried intent, protection, guidance, insight. To the untrained eye, it was a simple gesture. To those attuned, it was a conversation with forces beyond the realm of sight and sound. Around the hall, others prepared small rituals. Sprigs of evergreen and bundles of herbs were laid upon the hearth or hung near doorways. Salt was cast in careful lines along the threshold. Each action was deliberate, intended to maintain balance between the seen and unseen, between the mundane and the divine. Even as the young slept and warriors drifted into dreams, the rituals shaped the night, sending currents of protection and guidance flowing invisibly through the Longhouse. Dreams intertwined with prophecy. One warrior stirred, whispering names and places from visions too vivid to ignore. An elder nodded knowingly, translating the fragments into guidance. "The fjord will be treacherous," he murmured, "but the gods favor courage. Prepare, but do not fear." The words, though spoken quietly, held weight. The night was a teacher, and those who listened carefully could discern its lessons. Children, even in sleep, were not exempt. Some dreamed of celestial battles, of gods riding through the auroras above, their weapons glinting against the northern lights. Others dreamed of ancestors, who whispered advice or warned of unseen dangers. The mothers and aunts sang protective melodies, ensuring that the children's dreams remained safe and instructive, shaping young minds with echoes of wisdom that had traversed generations. The fire crackled, sending sparks swirling like tiny spirits into the rafters. Elders claimed these sparks were messengers, carrying prayers and intentions into realms unseen. Sometimes they swore the sparks answered in kind, altering the currents of fortune or providing subtle signs for those who knew how to interpret them. The Longhouse seemed to acknowledge the gestures, the whispered words, the ritual acts, a living entity shaped by human will and divine influence alike. Outside, the northern wilderness remained alert. Wolves patrolled invisible paths, ravens circled silently, and the wind carried faint echoes of distant waters and forests. Each sound was interpreted as a symbol, a message, a reminder of the thin veil separating life from mystery. The inhabitants of the Longhouse listened with trained ears, their senses sharpened by years of existence in a world where every movement could signify opportunity or danger. The night deepened, yet no corner was truly still. Elders moved, animals stirred, firelight flickered, and shadows danced. Every action was a layer in the fabric of nocturnal life. Even the Longhouse itself seemed alive, absorbing every whisper, every dream, every spell, every song. The timber remembered. The stone retained the weight of generations. The hearth carried warmth not only of fire but of memory, vigilance, and love. Hours passed, the stars wheeling overhead in patterns that were both predictable and unknowable. The northern lights shimmered faintly, their ethereal glow casting strange reflections through the smoke-filled interior. Dreams grew more vivid, rituals more precise, and the Longhouse continued its silent vigil. Every breath, every whispered word, every movement contributed to a collective consciousness that stretched beyond the individual, a living testament to the power of night, the continuity of life, and the unseen guidance of gods and ancestors alike. As the first pale light of dawn brushed the snow outside, the Longhouse held within it the memory of the entire night. Prophecies whispered, dreams pondered, rituals completed, all woven into the enduring fabric of existence. The people would awaken carrying the lessons and guidance of night, wisdom, courage, protection, and the subtle magic that comes from acknowledging the unseen. The night had passed, but it had left its mark, invisible yet indelible, shaping the Longhouse and its inhabitants for the day to come. The Longhouse rested uneasily, as if it sensed the restlessness of those who had embraced sleep yet were drawn into the invisible currents of the night. While some lay in slumber, others stirred, propelled by instinct, dream, or unseen summons. The warriors who remained awake felt the weight of expectation and history pressing upon them. Every shadow carried the possibility of omen, every creaking beam a whisper of past deeds. A few of the braver, younger warriors quietly gathered near the hearth, their eyes reflecting the flames. They whispered of raids not yet undertaken, of paths through frozen forests, and over jagged cliffs that would be treacherous at dawn. Maps and charts were unnecessary. Experience and intuition guided them. In dreams and in wakefulness, they sensed the subtle guidance of ancestors, spirits whose presence hovered just beyond perception, watching, sometimes offering encouragement, sometimes testing courage. Outside, the night stretched with silent authority. Wolves moved in coordinated stealth, shadows drifting over snow and ice. The wind carried faint echoes of distant waters and breaking ice, of frozen rivers hidden under the cloak of darkness. Some said that spirits of fallen warriors walked among the trees, testing those who dared to venture into the wilderness. Others believed that the auroras themselves were guides, painting the sky with colors that spoke in a language older than words, a language understood by the bold and attentive. The elders remained near the hearth, eyes half closed, aware that this was a night of trial and of opportunity. They murmured words of wisdom to those who listened, lessons about courage, patience, and respect for forces unseen. Occasionally, they moved to intervene subtly, offering guidance in dream or whispered instruction, ensuring that the Longhouse itself acted as protector and teacher in the absence of sunlight. Children slept in clusters, unaware of the deeper currents swirling through the hall. Yet even their dreams seemed charged with portent. A child dreaming of hunting in the woods might awaken with a sudden sense of direction, a spark of insight, as though the night itself had whispered guidance. The mothers and aunts watched over them, hands resting lightly on blankets, murmuring soft songs that bridged the worlds of waking and sleeping, mortal and divine. Within the Longhouse, the fire crackled with an almost sentient presence. Sparks rose like tiny spirits, carrying wishes, prayers, and fragments of visions into the rafters. Some sparks seemed to linger longer than physics would allow, casting long, fluid shadows across walls, columns, and sleeping forms. Elders interpreted these patterns, reading omens in their flicker, guiding decisions with the subtle authority that only comes from centuries of understanding the invisible flow of fate. The Longhouse itself pulsed with awareness. Timber and stone absorbed the movements of those inside, retaining memory and intent. Every creak, every shuffle, every whispered word contributed to the living consciousness of the building. It remembered the triumphs, the losses, the dreams, and the secrets. Time inside the Longhouse was elastic, stretching and contracting in rhythm with breath, heartbeat, and firelight. Past, present, and future intertwined seamlessly. Some warriors ventured beyond the doors, stepping silently into the frozen darkness. Their feet left faint tracks on the snow, quickly obscured by drifting flakes. Their eyes scanned the landscape, alert to both natural and supernatural threats. The wind carried warnings, or perhaps encouragement, depending on the listener's perception. Spirits, ancestral or elemental, were said to wander the forests, and those who respected the night moved with deference, offering small gestures to honor unseen watchers. As the hours of darkness progressed, trials continued. One warrior returned from a brief patrol, reporting signs in the snow, markings that seemed unnatural, perhaps a message from spirits, perhaps a test. Elders interpreted the signs carefully, sharing insight with the community without disturbing the rest who slept. Knowledge gained in darkness became a thread woven into the fabric of the Longhouse, shaping choices, courage, and understanding for the coming day. By the pre-dawn hours, the Longhouse hummed with the quiet aftermath of vigilance. Dreams, omens, and rituals had interlaced with real events outside. Those who slept carried visions that would guide them. Those awake had learned lessons in silence. The Longhouse itself held the sum of these experiences, every shadow, spark, and whispered word preserved in its consciousness, ready to inform the cycles of night yet to come. When the first faint light of the northern sky touched the snow, the Longhouse exhaled. The night had passed, yet its lessons endured. Courage, foresight, wisdom, and subtle magic had been practiced, observed, and stored. Life within the Longhouse, human and animal alike, awakened slowly, carrying with it the imprint of an intense, living night, one that was as much about dreaming and spirits as it was about vigilance and survival. The first light of dawn brushed pale over the northern landscape, softening the jagged silhouettes of mountains and the frost-covered expanse around the village. Within the Longhouse, the atmosphere shifted imperceptibly but undeniably. The shadows lengthened and faded, the embers glowed warmer, and a gentle warmth rose with the morning air. The Longhouse, having held the vigil of the night, exhaled quietly, releasing the tension and energy that had accumulated over hours of dreams, rituals, and silent observation. Warriors stirred, blinking against the dim firelight as they roused from their sleep. Dreams lingered like faint smoke, carrying images of distant fjords, ancestral guidance, and celestial phenomena witnessed in the ethereal hours. Some spoke quietly of visions, cryptic, instructive, sometimes haunting, and elders listened intently, interpreting fragments of night's teachings for the day ahead. Every insight, every warning, every lesson gleaned from dreams shaped the plans and decisions of the Longhouse, weaving past, present, and future into a continuous tapestry of living knowledge. Children opened their eyes to the warmth of early light and the smell of straw and furs. The lullabies of the mothers, still faint on their lips, had guided them safely through the night, and though the world outside called them to life, traces of dreams lingered in the air. Some recounted visions of gods riding in the auroras, animals speaking in riddles, or ancestors whispering advice. Adults smiled knowingly, aware that the night had imparted gifts, shaping the imagination and courage of the next generation. Elders moved through the hall, touching beams and floors with hands that had known centuries, feeling the echoes of night stored in the Longhouse itself. Each creak, each lingering spark of the fire, each subtle shadow was a memory, a lesson, a guide. They checked the protective charms, collected the remnants of rituals, and whispered thanks to gods, ancestors, and unseen spirits that had walked with them through darkness. The Longhouse remained a living archive, recording not only what was seen but also what was intuited, dreamed, and sensed. Animals began to stir with the return of light. Dogs stretched and yawned, cats prowled quietly, and even the smaller livestock shifted in anticipation of the day. Their presence was a comforting continuity, a reminder that life went on in cycles, night to day, sleep to wakefulness, dream to action. Their breath and movement added texture to the waking Longhouse, blending the practical with the mystical, the seen with the unseen. The warriors prepared for the day's duties, moving silently to respect the lingering dreams of others. Some sharpened blades, others tended to supplies, and a few quietly ventured outside to inspect paths and perimeters before the sun fully rose. Their movements were deliberate, informed by the knowledge gained through vigilance and dreams. The night had tested them, shaped them, and provided insight for survival, courage, and leadership. Outside, the frost glimmered, reflecting pale light across snow and river. Wolves howled faintly in the distance, a reminder that the wilderness, though peaceful in its own way, remained alive, ever-present, and unconquered. Ravens called, circling high above, their cries now mere background to the hum of daily life. Even the wind seemed gentler, carrying both memory and promise as it flowed across frozen landscapes toward the rising sun. The Longhouse absorbed these changes, adjusting to the rhythm of day. Shadows shortened, warmth expanded, and the energy of the night, once tense and expectant, transformed into practical, guiding force. Every whispered prayer, every dream, every ritual completed hours before left traces in the air, subtle yet powerful, shaping choices, courage, and understanding in tangible ways. The Longhouse had not merely contained the night, it had co-created it, preserving the lessons, fears, and insights for all who dwelled within. As the first villagers emerged fully awake, the Longhouse breathed with them. The night's trials, omens, and rituals were now woven into the actions and decisions of the community. Conversations began, recounting visions, interpreting signs, and sharing guidance. Children laughed softly, still half immersed in dreams. Warriors moved with purpose, elders guided with patience, and the Longhouse, alive with memory and spirit, stood as a guardian of both night and day, bridging the seen and unseen worlds seamlessly. By the time the sun rose high enough to burn off the morning frost, the Longhouse had completed its transition. Night's mysteries had been honored, dreams interpreted, rituals enacted, and protection maintained. Life in the Longhouse continued, carrying forward the subtle wisdom and magic of hours spent in darkness. The cycle of night and day, of sleep and wakefulness, of dreams and action, remained unbroken, and the community thrived, fortified by the unseen but deeply felt power of the Longhouse and its long, mystical night. The sun rose higher, casting pale gold across the snow-covered landscape and warming the timbered walls of the Longhouse. The night had receded, but its presence lingered in subtle ways, in the cautious movements of the warriors, in the contemplative expressions of the elders, in the quiet vigilance of the children and the gentle sway of animals now fully awake. The Longhouse had absorbed the essence of the night, and now released it as guidance for the day. Warriors, recently roused from dreams of fjords, storms, and ancestral spirits, moved with both purpose and caution. They spoke quietly of what they had seen in visions, of omens interpreted from sparks, shadows, and celestial signs. Their actions were deliberate. Preparation for hunting, patrolling, or tending to tools was informed not only by immediate needs but also by insights gained under the cover of darkness. Decisions made at night carried weight, shaping strategy, alliances, and even interpersonal relations within the hall. Children, refreshed by their rest and dreams, carried fragments of visions into play and learning. A young boy who dreamed of distant forests moved with a newfound curiosity and bravery, while a child who had seen ancestors in sleep showed an unexpected patience and attentiveness. Their imaginations, nourished by night's subtle magic, guided their daytime activities. They played, learned, and observed with a reverence that hinted at the invisible currents that shaped their thoughts and behaviors. Elders, ever watchful, moved among the living. They interpreted omens, guided actions, and adjusted the household's plans based on night's lessons. A carved staff tapped lightly against the floor as an elder measured the timing for leaving on hunting expeditions or preparing trade goods. Quiet murmurs advised the positioning of livestock, the timing of chores, or even the selection of stories to be shared at communal meals. Every action reflected the wisdom of generations who had understood that night and day were two halves of a continuous, instructive whole. The hearth, now fully ablaze with morning light and tending, became a nexus of continuity. Mothers stirred food, water boiled over embers, and small animals padded about, alert to movements and scents. Every element, from the smallest spark to the largest log of firewood, carried the resonance of night. Even as practical activity dominated, subtle rituals persisted. A touch of salt to a doorway, a whispered name to the wind, a careful observation of animal behavior. All actions grounded in the lessons of night, carried forward into the sunlit hours. Outside, the world seemed both familiar and charged with the memory of night. Wolves lingered at the edge of vision, ravens circled overhead, and the wind moved across ice and snow with the echo of unseen forces. The village was alive with motion, yet every inhabitant remained attuned to what the Longhouse and night had imparted. Steps were cautious but confident, hands precise, eyes alert to signs, patterns, and potential opportunities or dangers. Meals were shared in quiet ritual. Food prepared in the hearth not only nourished bodies but also honored spirits, ancestors, and unseen watchers. Conversation included recounted dreams, subtle warnings, and practical planning. Elders and warriors discussed visions from the night, interpreting omens in a way that guided both safety and prosperity. Children listened, learning the delicate balance between superstition, reverence, and pragmatic action. The Longhouse itself seemed to pulse with approval, each creak and breath affirming that its inhabitants had understood the continuity of night and day. By midday, the Longhouse was fully alive, yet the influence of night remained in the careful, deliberate actions of its occupants. Tasks were undertaken with mindfulness, decisions made with attention to subtle signs, and the rhythm of life reflected the integration of dreams, ritual, and real-world action. The community, though awake and active, carried the wisdom, protection, and lessons of darkness in every movement. As afternoon settled, shadows shifted subtly across the timbered walls. Light changed, carrying hints of what the approaching evening would bring. The Longhouse seemed to anticipate night once more, holding the memory of prior hours and preparing for cycles yet to come. For those who had experienced the full depth of the previous night, the day was not merely survival but a conscious living of night's teachings, a continuation of vigilance, dream, ritual, and connection with both the natural and supernatural worlds. By the time the sun began its descent, the Longhouse and its inhabitants had woven night's subtle lessons seamlessly into daily life. Warriors were strengthened by foresight, children enriched by imagination and guidance, elders satisfied by the practical and mystical continuity of their vigilance. Every heartbeat, every movement, every whispered word carried the imprint of night, ensuring that the living and dreaming remained intertwined, and that the wisdom of darkness endured in the light. As the afternoon waned, the Longhouse seemed to settle into a rhythm that echoed the cycles of night and day. Each movement, each breath, each flicker of light was a subtle reminder that time was both linear and circular, carrying the weight of what had passed and the promise of what would come. The people of the Longhouse, attuned to these rhythms, had learned to move with them, integrating lessons from night into action and reflecting on daytime experiences to guide their dreams once more. Warriors observed patterns in their daily routines that mirrored insights gleaned from dreams. The sharpness of the axe, the alignment of the shield, the timing of a step on icy terrain, all were influenced by knowledge acquired while the Longhouse slept. They carried the silent whispers of ancestors, the protective guidance of spirits, and the subtle nudges of gods in each deliberate action. Even tasks as simple as tending to livestock or preparing firewood became exercises in attentiveness, continuity, and respect for cycles beyond immediate perception. Children moved with a blend of curiosity and awareness that reflected the guidance of night. Games, explorations, and interactions were subtly informed by dreams, encounters with spirits, visions of ancestors, and imagined adventures in distant lands. They learned the rhythm of the world not only through observation but through internalized experiences of night, blending play with learning, imagination with insight. Mothers and elders watched, nurturing the development of intuition alongside practical skills, teaching the delicate balance between imagination, reverence, and survival. Elders remained the conscious anchor of the Longhouse, interpreting patterns, recording lessons, and guiding actions. Their rituals, subtle and continuous, ensured that the Longhouse itself remained a participant in the cycles, storing memory and influence in every timber and stone. Every creak, every shadow, every flicker of smoke was read, understood, and integrated into the collective consciousness. The Longhouse was not a passive shelter but a living partner, shaping and being shaped by its inhabitants across night and day, dream and action. Even the animals reflected these cycles. Dogs, cats, and livestock adjusted naturally to rhythms of vigilance, rest, and activity. Their presence provided continuity, grounding human perception while subtly echoing instincts attuned to unseen patterns. Their movements, responses, and interactions were interpreted as signs or lessons, reinforcing the unity between living beings and the mystical framework that enveloped them. As dusk approached, the Longhouse prepared to transition once again into the mysterious hours of night. Shadows lengthened, firelight flickered in anticipation, and the wind outside carried whispers of the unseen world. The people of the Longhouse, now seasoned by day's activities, were ready to re-enter the realm of dreams, omens, and ritual. Each cycle reinforced the previous, building layers of wisdom, courage, and understanding that transcended any single human lifetime. The Longhouse itself seemed aware of this continuity. Timber, stone, and firelight held memory of countless nights and days, storing lessons and experiences in ways invisible yet deeply tangible. The cycles were not repetitive. Each night and day added complexity, depth, and nuance. The inhabitants understood that survival and wisdom depended on attunement to these rhythms. Listening, observing, dreaming, acting, and reflecting in harmonious sequence. By the end of the cycle, the Longhouse was alive with accumulated wisdom. Warriors moved with experience informed by dreams, children played with insight inherited from visions, and elders orchestrated guidance that bridged generations. Even the animals participated, their instincts reinforcing the unity of the dwelling and the land. Every breath, every heartbeat, every movement was a thread in the tapestry of life, stretching across night and day, past and future, mortal and divine. As the first stars began to glimmer faintly in the twilight sky, anticipation of night returned. The Longhouse, enriched by the day, awaited the next cycle, another night of dreams, omens, trials, and mystical communion. Its walls and hearth were alive, carrying accumulated memory, and preparing to guide inhabitants through the continuity of existence. The cycle of night and day had become both teacher and protector, shaping lives in ways subtle and profound, ensuring that every moment, awake or asleep, contributed to the ongoing story of the Longhouse and its people. The Longhouse stood as it had for countless seasons, a sentinel of timber and stone against the vast northern wilderness. Every beam, every floorboard, every stone had absorbed centuries of memory, of births, deaths, battles, laughter, tears, prayers, and whispered dreams. The night and day cycles had left their imprint, layered upon one another like sediment of experience, shaping the inhabitants and the dwelling alike. As twilight descended, the Longhouse prepared to enter another night, yet the air carried the resonance of countless nights past. Warriors moved through the hall, their bodies weary yet strengthened by sleep and visions, their minds attuned to subtle omens and ancestral guidance. Each step, each movement, each glance carried the influence of lessons learned in darkness, interpreted through the wisdom of elders and the intuition cultivated over years of attentive observation. Children nestled among furs and blankets, their imaginations alive with fragments of dreams. They carried visions of distant lands, encounters with spirits, and guidance from ancestors into waking consciousness, translating the mystical into action in play and learning. Mothers hummed protective melodies, weaving the sacred continuity of night into the fabric of daily life, ensuring that innocence was nurtured alongside understanding, courage, and reverence. Elders walked slowly through the hall, observing patterns, adjusting subtle rituals, and offering guidance in whispered words. They were the custodians of continuity, the guardians of memory, and the interpreters of unseen forces. Every gesture, a tap of the staff, a traced rune, a whispered name, maintained the balance between mortal perception and divine influence, between the tangible and the invisible, between the present moment and the echoes of generations past. Outside, the northern wilderness waited in quiet majesty. Wolves moved silently through the snow, ravens circled in the sky, and the wind whispered across frozen rivers and forests. Every sound was a reminder that the world beyond the Longhouse remained alive, unpredictable, and sacred. The villagers, attuned to these patterns, moved with awareness and respect, carrying the lessons of night and day into every interaction, every task, every decision. The hearth burned steadily, a locus of life, memory, and continuity. Sparks rose, as if carrying fragments of the Longhouse's soul, weaving the essence of night into the air and preparing for the next cycle. The building itself seemed aware, alive with the accumulated wisdom of centuries, ready to guide, protect, and nurture those within. Every shadow, every creak, every flicker of light told a story, a fragment of a grand tapestry that stretched across time, space, and generations. As night deepened, the Longhouse embraced its inhabitants with the familiarity of eternity. Dreams, omens, and rituals intertwined seamlessly with reality, each informing the other in an endless dialogue. The people of the Longhouse, warriors, elders, mothers, children, and animals, became threads in this living tapestry, contributing to a story that was both personal and communal, temporal and eternal. The cycles of night and day, dream and wakefulness, action and reflection, continued without interruption. Each night was a lesson, each day an application of insight, each movement a reaffirmation of the bond between the seen and unseen. The Longhouse, in its silent majesty, witnessed the eternal rhythm, preserving memory, imparting guidance, and nurturing life. When dawn finally broke across the northern horizon, light spilled over the Longhouse and its people. The world outside was as harsh and beautiful as ever, yet within, the lessons of countless nights had prepared its inhabitants for survival, courage, and wisdom. The Longhouse exhaled with the new day, a living archive of experience and insight, eternal in its ability to bridge the mortal and divine, the practical and mystical, the transient and timeless. And so the cycle continued, endlessly and faithfully, each night and day building upon the last, weaving a narrative of life, dream, guidance, and reverence that would persist as long as the Longhouse stood against the wilderness. Its story, a story of survival, courage, insight, and the invisible threads that connect generations, endured beyond sleep, beyond waking, beyond the limits of time itself. the Longhouse, eternal and vigilant, remained a sanctuary for the living, a repository of dreams and wisdom, and a silent witness to the unbroken continuity of night, day, and life in the northern wilderness. Here, in timber and stone, in breath and dream, in shadow and firelight, the world of the Vikings lived, remembered, and endured.